So I'm going to begin by making you work a little bit. So I'm going to ask you two questions. We're going to do a show of hands. How many of you, as you were kids, were brought up within a religious tradition? Okay, that's quite a lot. Thank you. Second question. How many of you, as you were growing older, started feeling that maybe you were growing out of that tradition? Look at that. Okay. So I think all of you with your hand up are going to understand what's happening here. Hopefully by the end of my talk, you'll know what the God-shaped hole is, and I might have left you with some food for thought and for paradigm shifting. There we go. So that's not me, but pretend it's me. I grew up in Spain, and Spain is a traditionally Catholic country. And when I say Spain is a traditionally Catholic country, I don't only mean that I was brought up to believe in a Catholic God. I mean a lot more of things. When a country is traditionally part of one religion, it affects the architecture. So we can think of lots of small towns that begin with the church, and then the church square, and then it slowly takes from there. It affects the calendar, like we had Christmas, and now we're going to have Easter. It affects other things such as language. Like if I was now to sneeze, you would say, correct. So you see, religion does actually seep through parts of life, even though we're now considered to be living in Europe in secular times, which means that religious and political powers are separated, which is another paradigm shift. So that was all groovy, that was all meant how it was to be happening, and I was following the flow. But then as part of my teenage rebellion, I was preparing to do the confirmation ceremony, and sorry, that tricked me out. I was preparing to do the confirmation ceremony, and as you might have guessed from the name, confirmation ceremony is when you confirm that you actually want to actively opt in that religion. And I was being prepared in that moment, and it just didn't sound right. I was the only person in my group that opted out. And you might think, oh, she's going to tell us this story about how she was ostracized by those really bad Catholics. No. Like, my life was groovy. Even the priest was nice about it. It really was no problem. Opting out of Catholicism not only didn't lead to any problems other than, sure, I've had a fight with my parents. But take a wild guess. I was a very difficult teenager. I was going to fight with my parents anyways. So, other than that, it really didn't have any bad consequences. You could even say that I was #blessed. Or actually, let me fix that for you. Godlessly #blessed. Shortly after I abandoned my religion, I got a United World College scholarship. Anyone heard of those? Yeah. I moved from Spain to Swaziland, where I was to live for the next 2 years. I met some of the best people I'll ever meet in my life. I thought I was going to be a writer, but I rediscovered the world of visual arts. I became very much in love with it. And speaking about being in love, I met this guy who eventually I married. So, talk about that. Oh, did you guys go, oh? Yeah. So all of these advantages, these privileges, these crazy experiences didn't quite finish there. It led to me being accepted to one of the very best, fanciest, poshest universities for creatives out there in the world. And everything was groovy. And I stayed in that university, and I successfully graduated in 2008. You guys are young, but do any of you know what happened in 2008? Crisis. It needs the ninja move with it, yeah. So the crisis, it really felt like there was a world, and then after the crisis, which was one day for another, like it just happened in 24 hours, the way we were standing, there was nothing. So at this point, you have me having lost my God, and satisfied about losing my God, no regrets, but actually I also lost my future, and that was a lot more complicated, if you ask me. Because, sure, you lose God, but you still have this idea of all these things to live forward for. You know, you have all these things to look forward to. And life is good. But then when there's no future and there's no God, what is left? You start questioning, and you start feeling this kind of sense of loss inside. And me being Spanish, when I tell you the crisis was serious, it was very, very serious. So talking about loss, this sexy gentleman on the back is Pascal, and we owe the title of this talk to him. Now, you might guess from the way he's standing and his face that he wasn't cool enough to come up with the idea of the God-shaped hole, but that's just a shortening of something else he said. What he said is humanity tends to have this inner craving, this yearning, that leads them to search and search and search for a way to fulfill this craving, but that they cannot ever fulfill it, because the only element that can ever fill that emptiness is this infinite being, which is God. So, 2008, godless and futureless. And this little thing symbolizes this God-shaped hole. So again, I never regretted leaving God behind, but I did very much feel this emptiness. So in a way, you could say that God was never a very big deal to me, but the loss was huge. Now, many of you might relate to these experiences when we did the show of hands. And after the crisis, this idea of the God-shaped hole might come in other shapes and other kind of beginnings. But people tend to have this yearning that Pascal was talking about, and some people might try to do something about it, as he suggested. Some people might buy crystals. How many people do you know buying crystals nowadays? They're really pretty. Oh, somebody's going like, she does. Get on Instagram, they're fantastic, but they will not fill your God-shaped hole. Some other people might find an idol that they follow, and every time somebody starts a conversation, you might want to convince them of how great Lemonade is and how it's a masterpiece, and we should all watch it. And it is true. Lemonade is a masterpiece, but Lemonade will not fill your God-shaped hole. You might even be as lucky as I am, find the cutest, smartest, kindest dog in the world and adopt him, and have your life filled with walkies and hair, but it will not fill your God-shaped hole. So, let's put my sad face and my God-shaped hole over here, and let me take you with me time traveling. What you can see behind me is a picture of the original Warburg Institute, which was in Germany. Nowadays, the Warburg Institute is in London because #history. What you're seeing in here is not only his library, which had this peculiar oval shape, but also the look of the last project he ever attempted. This was, to me, like the culmination of Aby Warburg, the founder of the Warburg Institute, who was also a person that was looking for meaning and craving, like Pascal said. These bizarre kind of panels with images you can just barely see in the picture were part of his project Atlas Mnemosyne, which is like the Atlas of Memory. Aby Warburg was an art historian, and he was one of the first, if not the first people to say that there's images that survive through history. So there's a certain icon, certain shapes, certain formulas that even though they're very, very ancient, they keep on popping up. Now, this was his idea with the Atlas, and that's why he was trying to spot the ghost of these images coming through contemporary images in this atlas. This sounds a bit abstract. We're going to have some examples later on. But what I wanted to talk to you about was not only his idea, which is great, and I think people can use a lot nowadays, but also if you see the actual space. Aby Warburg said that in order to process all these combinations of images and all these combinations of emotions he was trying to observe, you needed to take some distance. You needed to take a step back and create what he called a Denkraum, which is a thinking space. Now, Warburg literally had a thinking space, which is what you can see here in the picture. But he also meant a mental space, that distance that allows you to kind of observe patterns, see things emerge, and have an opportunity for contemplation, if you would call it like that. Now, remember I was here, sad face. We have Warburg. So here's what I'm proposing. This is obviously a religious space. What I'm proposing is, what happens if we take Warburg's Denkraum, so his idea that you need a space to have a pause and take a step back and kind of have a sense of distance, and we take the God-shaped hole, and then we mix the two of them. So what happens if you actually take that inner loss, that vacant space within you, and instead of rushing to fill it in, you take it as an opportunity for contemplation. and you don't run to feel something that cannot be felt anyways, but you enjoy it for its own sake and for its own emptiness. And not only that, my suggestion has a second phase. Once you're in that space, that once the idea of God inhabited and now has left vacant, maybe you will see around and see that the space is not even that empty. Humanity has produced amazing artifacts that have been left behind in this God-shaped hole. There's architecture, there is music, there is literature, and there is art. And my suggestion to you today is that just because God has left the building, we might not have to throw away all these masterpieces that were about him. What I'd like to tell you is that religious art, and specifically Catholic art, can not only still conserve power, it can still be meaningful today to people who don't believe in God. And that it actually has a power of empathy that very little artwork offers nowadays. And can even be really, really funny. So religious art can help you when you're feeling lost or confused. And it's not like it will have an answer, but it will say, I've been there. And what you're going through is absolutely normal. The same when you're in pain. Whether it's physical or emotional. They're hilarious images. You're allowed to laugh. This is really, really funny. Religious art can even understand when you're not very gracious or brave, when your life is about to change dramatically. In case you don't know what you're looking at, this is a depiction of an annunciation. And in Catholic tradition, this is the moment where the messenger of God tells the Virgin Mary she is pregnant with God. And this teenage virgin is just running away for her life, absolutely terrified, and so is the cat in the background. This picture is from 1500s, you guys. When we have religious art and we're looking for the religious messages in them, we might just lose the sheer, bare, raw humanity that lies beneath them. Now, religious art is not only powerful on its own, it actually has power combined with contemporary images. And we go back to Warburg's idea that images kind of survive through time. So, for example, religious images tend to appear in pop culture often, regularly. And it doesn't mean that what we're looking at contemporarily is religious, but it adds a certain depth and a certain message. It adds that je ne sais quoi. It even can be a very distant relationship, and sometimes no relationship, just a subconscious connection. But the images we see, if we have a history and a culture of religious images, will allow us to stop, and once we encounter that image, kind of find a mesmerizing moment, a contemplative time, which goes back to this idea of respecting the emptiness. And what I want to finally say is that with religious art, it's not only that it's sympathetic and funny and that can feed contemporary culture. It's that because of all of that, it can still feed the future. And remember, you had me there. I had lost God and I had lost the future. But it's been through my analysis and my study of religious art that I have discovered that it can be the foundation for lots of future images and art and amazing things that humanity can produce. So, in conclusion, if you find yourself feeling that loss, feeling that emptiness, that God-shaped hole, don't rush to buy crystals or learn all the Beyoncé lyrics. Do adopt dogs, though. Just make sure that you give yourself time and pause to meditate, to contemplate, to disconnect. This is hugely important, especially nowadays. This space belongs to you, and you can use it. Thank you very much.